Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for the next in the series of Guild Online Talks. We are delighted to welcome Jon Snow of Channel 4 News, long-term supporter of the Eye Hospital. Jon attended a hospital reception at Apsley House in 2013. He performed the role of auctioneer at our 2014 Mansion House dinner and visited our Gaza hospital, interviewing Majid Abu Ramadan, former Gaza mayor and ophthalmologist and trustee of St. John, about the situation in Gaza after the most recent conflict in 2015. There's a photograph of him on the roof of the hospital, which was published in our Jerusalem scene, which we're going to show today. Mm-hmm. On behalf of the Guild, I would like to thank Jon very much for giving up his time today to give this talk. We're extremely grateful for his continued support at the Eye Hospital. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions throughout this afternoon's session via the chat box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. Deanna Safier, who's our Guild coordinator and has organised today, and I will field any questions, several of which have been emailed during the registration process. So thank you for that. We hope you enjoy the talk. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for supporting essential eye care that we carry out in Jerusalem and the occupied territories of Gaza, Anabta and Hebron. I'm going to now hand you over to Jon. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very, very much for joining. I must confess that my introduction to the region that we're discussing and the wonderful work of the Eye Hospital was my own father, who was a very posh guy. He ended up a bishop and was educated at Winchester, and he was a teacher at Eton, so he was a real knob. And but the one thing that really was his redemption was that for some reason he made his way to the Middle East, and he made his way to Jerusalem. I mean, all this, of course, was before anything happened. So this was, in the 30s, and he, would support projects and that sort of thing. And of course, having not been many other places, when we were kids, all he ever talked about was the wonderful area that we now talk about in terms of the occupied territories, Gaza and Palestine. And he talked all the time about Palestine, even though, actual formal Palestine in his lifetime never existed. I mean, in that sense. That is with a sort of capital P and a seat at the United Nations. So I've been to the region quite a lot down the years, although I have not been in the last 3 or 4 years. The last time I was there was actually in 2015, and I went to Gaza to see how things were given what had been happening in the previous months, the war and the rest. And I was absolutely captivated. I was captivated by the density of humanity, the fact that despite all that, there was an absolute life. There was a joy even. Can you imagine? Yes, there was a joy. Having read so much about it down the years, you kind of begin to think every time you go away, you'll come back and find it absolutely unendurable. And in lots of ways, it is unendurable. But people endure, very strong characters and doing wonderful work. And St. John's is very, very much part of that, and is a sort of emblematic of what can be done. After all, it's an eye hospital which, when it was founded, had nearly all expatriate doctors and experts, and now basks in its own indigenous eye doctors and nurses and the rest of it. It's an incredible achievement, absolutely against the grain. If you think of everything else that's been going on all these years, the idea that this tulip has gone from a bulb into the most extraordinary array of capacity, of work, and of making a profound difference in a region where, the idea of an eye hospital once upon a time would have been unthinkable. It's incredible. And this is what this charity has achieved, together with the fabulous workforce that are the people and patients of Gaza and the West Bank, the occupied territories. So I feel privileged to be with you today, and I hope we can address some of your questions. So without more ado, shall we point the gun and have a go?
That's a great intro. Thank you, John. I didn't, it's lovely to hear actually. I have a very similar introduction to St. John, like you. My father was a churchman, and he introduced me and he took me to the Middle East, first when I was 11. So it's lovely to hear that we were obviously captivated by our father's joy, and so that's a really interesting thing. We've got a couple of pre-prepared questions, Deanna, which I think that were given at registration. We've got a photograph, I think, of you on the roof of our hospital at Gaza, and that's the first hospital built in. There we are. Could you tell us about your reflections of that visit? It was a follow-up to the 2014 visit.
Yes, I mean, we honoured this. You know, there is so little coverage of that whole region that you really have no idea what's been going on until you get there. And as I said in my opening, I went prepared to find things even worse than they are. But the resilience and the capacity of the people knows absolutely no bounds. And despite the endless conflict with Israel, the truth is they prevail. The Gazans prevail, and the people in the West Bank and the occupied territories generally do spiritually prevail. You expect to find people down at heel and really depressed, and of course there is that. People do feel depressed when they think about it, but they also live, and they live joyous lives in terrible conditions. It's an extraordinary tribute to their resilience. My trip was really just to try and work out what was going on. And of course, things were going on when I was there. You know, just absolutely random shootings across the border into Gaza, for example. I think the thing you never forget is actually getting into Gaza. It's a ridiculous trail through corrugated, probably changes all the time, but the last time I went, there was a very sort of policed, corrugated iron corridor, probably about a mile long, I would say, altogether, which you sort of stumble along carrying all your heavy TV gear. Would it be possible for one of your people to run this down and we'll meet at the other? Not a chance. No, that would have been far too much to ask the Israeli border guards to do. There's a tolerance and a sort of feeling of hostility that you shouldn't really be doing what you're doing. But what you're doing, in fact, is entering, another country, however they may wish to deny it, and another people. And you are hoping to report their doings when you get there. But it is a hostile environment getting in there. And then a rather joyous environment when you do get there, because they're thrilled to see you, delighted. And that's the first time since you landed at Tel Aviv airport. My memories are of resilience, and they always are. They always are. And that's why there is hope, because where there is resilience, there is hope. And hope is beautifully expressed in what's been achieved with the St. John Hospital. The transition from before to during to as it is now is amazing, and a huge human achievement. I'm happy to move on to some questions.
Yeah, I wanted to just pick up on the access issues, because we have our mobile outreach program where we converted the small vans. You may have seen them when you were there, and obviously they're dressed, and it's proof of the adaptability, as you say, the prospering and the flowering, the being able to get to our patients. They can't get to us, which is a key and a really fabulous part of the St. John group work.
I would like to just jump in and just tell you a little bit about who's joining us today, because we've been joined by some of our dear supporters that have been supporting us in many different ways. We've got Vincent Fien, who's former Consul General. Hi, Vincent.
Yeah.
And he is a chair. Yes, he's fantastic.
It's been too long since I last spoke to you, but it's lovely to know that you're there.
Yes, well, I'm actually working with him in the Balfour project as well, and they very kindly offered us their webinar function to be able to host this today. He's got a question that I'll ask of you later once we get through some of our other questions. And we've got a bunch of current, former staff members here in London and in Jerusalem, as well as trustees, Guy Morton and so forth. We've got loads of people representing the CPGs, the county priority groups around the UK. Mary Nunn, who is down in Devon and who does amazing open gardens for us. And we've got Paul Herbage, our new hospitaller for the Priory of England. So hello, everyone. Ian Alexander and a whole bunch of KT, Angus Rhodes, Darren from the KT and the Masons, who are also big supporters of ours. Ian came with me to Jerusalem on a donor visit once upon a time, and I hope you found it very fascinating. And we've got members of
have you seen Jane Franklin's raised hand?
Yes, I will ask everyone if they could type their questions in the chat. That would be fantastic, thank you. And John Bond as well, if you've got questions, please type them in the chat. And we've got the Goodings as well, who pay for the who kindly pay for our School of Nursing to be accredited by the University of West London. So we've got my dad, Afif Safieh, former Palestinian ambassador to the UK.
Hi, Dad. I think I knew you.
Hi, Papa Safieh. So yeah, we're just honored with everyone that's come along. So I just wanted to give everyone a shout out. Do you want me to ask Vincent's question, Georgie?
Yes, that would be great. And a shout out to the Australians and the South Africans who joined us. Thank you.
So Vincent asked a question: how do you assess the UK media coverage of the daily life of Palestinians? Too little, too superficial? Why? With the honourable exception of Channel 4 News, he says. And
no exception. I mean, to be honest, we're all superficial. I mean, it is. What's the explanation? I suppose one of the problems is it's expensive to keep somebody there, although of course there's indigenous capacity. You know, you have to go to the region to cover it, and it's not cheap. And you know, it's always on the list, and it always gets bumped down by the next international disaster, stroke, mishandling, whatever. It's always bumped down the list of priorities because it's forever there. It doesn't really, the ingredients don't really change. And so they go for what's new rather than what needs reporting on a regular basis. You know, I mean, there are freelancers in the region, but, you know, it's very hard to make it work. And there's no excuse. It wouldn't be in the situation, the region would not be in the situation it's in if there were comprehensive international coverage at all times. But, you know, there are other priorities.
It's difficult, and 24-hour news cycle, trying to fill that up. I've got a question from Guy Morton. He is one of our trustees for St. John Eye Hospital. He says, "Dear John, thank you for talking to us and for all your support. As a commentator who follows the politics of the region closely, what advice would you give to us on how to promote our humanitarian mission without being seen to take a political position?"
Well, I know the social network has come in for the most terrible, you know, caning over the last few days. But the truth of the matter is that Twitter, Facebook, and other things do actually provide a platform which you can make work. I use Twitter a lot. I retweet, you know, a lot of other charities, etc. And I would certainly retweet you if you had something you wanted said. What, of course, is immensely effective is if people who work within the project can use their iPhone to take pictures of what they're doing, because actually the story that you tell is a news story. People don't actually know that that the transformation between originally expatriate labour, expatriate professionals and trained doctors and the rest of it to indigenous is utterly remarkable and would make interesting film. 3 minutes, 4 minutes. And oddly enough, at the end of it, somebody would want to donate. So it would have two things. It would educate the public as to what you're doing, and it would raise money. So I am a fan of the social network, and we have found other charities that have actually been able to make great use of it. Now, you'll probably tell me you're making great use of it already.
We're trying.
Yeah.
But there's so many platforms out there, it can be difficult to make sure
But
you're present on all of them.
Target people like me if you can face it and tell me to follow you. I will follow you anyway now, but you know, and I'm writing down on my bit of paper what I've got to do at the end of this. But you know, there's no harm in targeting people and saying, "Would you follow us?" Because actually, I think you'll find it interesting.
Yeah, fantastic. That's really good advice. Thank you. So we've got Jane Franklin's question that's come in. She says, John, thank you. I worked at the Hospital of St. John in the 80s. How has the wall created problems? I loved my time working there and attending clinics in the West Bank. That's Jane Franklin.
How has the
wall created problems?
Well, I mean, I think not only does it obviously interrupt the opportunity to move in and out in a civilized and normal way, which actually, you know, is the right of people both sides of the wall. But worse than that, it actually is a front line, as we know too much to our cost, that people have been damaged and shot and killed at the wall over time. So I mean, it's a magnet. It's a magnet for trouble, and if it wasn't there would be less trouble. Actually, in a funny sort of way, they think, oh, we'd be much more vulnerable. Not true. Not true. A wall establishes utterly the wrong message. They think it's the right message, but it's wrong.
And in terms of St. John, as an organization, we obviously started off at the Jerusalem Hospital, and everyone from the region, Gaza included, used to come just to the Jerusalem Hospital. The area of the land is very small, isn't it? So, but when the wall went up, that is when we had to start setting up satellite clinics and hospitals and so forth, because people couldn't access us. So we had to try to expand our services so that we could get to the people who could.
Well, that is also part of the reason for the wall, to erode the possibility of living good, healthy lives.
No, I mean, to put it in context, I think the area of Palestine, Israel, is about the size of Wales, isn't it? Something like that. It's tiny. So, so it is a bit crazy that we've had to have these different hospitals and clinics in such a small area, but it's because people can't get to us. And even with the satellite clinics and hospitals, we've had to expand further with our mobile outreach program, which is what the Guild fundraises for specifically.
There is, of course, the positive message. You may think you are terminating our services, but actually what you've done is to grow them.
Yeah, it's a lovely way to look at it. Georgie, do you want to take one of your questions?
We've got a few COVID questions actually, and we've got a couple on screen and some that came in earlier about the region-specific COVID issues, how COVID's affected. And I think Tony Bethel said, what is the effect of on the hospitals and clinics? But I think that's a question for Ahmed's next talk. But John, do you have anything for us on how the COVID has affected our region specifically?
I don't really, except that the last time I looked, the figures were actually surprisingly lower than I thought they would be. I may be wrong, but I think we thought that this region would be terribly targeted by COVID. You know, people,
Gaza in particular,
yeah, suffering from, you know, bad water, malnutrition, etc., all, and on occasion, obviously, obesity and the other things which go with awful diets, etc. But actually, the resilience of the people seems to come through it, and the figures are relatively encouraging, certainly compared with Britain.
Yeah. There was quite an early lockdown by Israel, wasn't there?
Yeah, it's true.
2 weeks before us, was it?
2 weeks before us, yeah.
But the second wave, the numbers have been going up in the last 3 weeks.
Everywhere.
Mm.
Well, of course, they're now saying it's not a second spike, it's a continuation of the first spike.
Mm.
So where it's going, I don't think any of the three of us know.
Nope.
Mm.
I've got a question that's come in from Magan Sengodia, who is also of the Balfour Project. The current political situation in Israel does not require continuity, does not secure a continuity of government. What do you think will happen, especially thinking of the relationship with the Palestinians in Israel and the Palestinian occupied territories?
I think this is an incredibly important question and equally difficult actually to answer, but I think there were quite interesting signals. I mean, I was surprised by the number of members of the Knesset who actually voted against it. I mean, of course, it had a great majority, but there was a surprisingly large resistance to annexation and the rest of it. So I also think, and Vincent and others are much better observers than I am, and it would be good to hear from him, but I actually think that annexation is in very serious trouble. You know, I mean, he had his deadline. He had the day he was going to do it. The day passed, and the roof did not fall in. You know, the truth is, I'm not sure there is the appetite for it in the end. And he, of course, is now back on trial. So I think we have passed a serious threshold, which could have been very, very damaging indeed. I mean, really could have led actually to bloody conflict on a real scale. And it hasn't happened. And I'm an optimist. I think we've passed the worst on that score. But I could be wrong, but Vincent and other people are much more equipped to deal with this than I am. Can we say something to you?
Well, I might jump in and say that if anyone's interested in following the work of the Balfour Project, then please do check out the website balfourproject.org, because they are having a monthly-ish online lecture series where they cover a lot of topics such as this, a lot of current topics, a lot of things relating to the history of Mandate Palestine, and they've also got a section on their website with recordings from past events where they touch on topics like this. So maybe they'll /me will ask John to do a talk to them too. Georgie, have you got a question?
We've got a question about the role of charities such as St. John in the region and the importance that they play. In your experience, John, I know you worked with us closely, but other charities?
Well, I think the story of charities in the region is extraordinary because, I mean, if you look at the history of St. John, it has prevailed. And I think prevailed precisely because it is a charity. You know, it is not in the end, it's not in the end provided by the French or the British or the Americans or whatever. It is a charity to which many, many different nations and people subscribe. And it's kept the purity of the charitable endeavor very beautifully. And there are other instances of it in the region. And it's, I think, one of the reasons it survives. You know, I think that if the parties had become, if the Israelis had determined that in the end it had become political and was part of some kind of, conspiracy against them and all the rest of it, and their health service, it wouldn't have prevailed. But it's prevailed precisely because it is a recognized and wonderful charity. And its primary business is the health, the eye care of the people of Palestine.
We've touched on this a little bit. So we have the awkward situation as a charity of sort of not getting involved in the politics, which is why we managed to have a good reputation with everyone that we need to work with in the region. That's necessary for us to be able to do the work that we do. There's lots of advocacy groups and other charities out there that do other kinds of work. but it's difficult because obviously politics is everything in that region in particular, and it's really hard to talk about why your services are needed or why you need to do something or why there's been obstacles when without talking about the politics. But we try to.
Sotto voce, you would say, well, it is precisely because we actually haven't got the institutions of a nation. We have not got a country to run a health service. So we are a charity running a health service.
That's a good point. But in saying that, we do have to talk about politics a little bit, and who better than you? So we've got a question from George Woods, who's from St. John in South Africa, who actually came to our event in Guildhall, where you were as well. Yeah. That was a lovely event where we had people from St. John all around the world come join us. So that was fantastic. Mm-hmm. Here's a big one. It was going to come up. Dear Jon, do you have a view on the two-state solution? Is this feasible still?
I believe it is feasible still. I believe the day will come. I'm an eternal optimist, I must admit, but I think, you know, there are ways in which the world is beginning to change, not specific to Israel-Palestine, but much more generally. I mean, we have actually gone a long time now without a great global conflict, a world war. And therefore it's given us space to begin to look at those micro elements which could provoke a world war. I think one of the real drawbacks to progress is the fact that people have become very absorbed with their own local and not enough with the world. Yes, we're talking about greenery, we're talking about climate change, but we're not talking about resolving those resolvable issues. And Israel-Palestine is a resolvable issue. A two-state solution is, I think, still the only credible one. And actually, the thing is, if you go, into the Palestinian or Gazan sectors, you are going into another country. I mean, psychologically, I know what it's like to go from Britain to France. I know what it's like to go to Israel, from Israel to, Palestine.
It's quite intimidating, isn't it, that checkpoint?
That checkpoint is, but the fact is you are going to another country. Mm-hmm. And in fact, all the paraphernalia is of going to another country. Yeah. And I think also that as humanity moves on, I mean that there are fewer and fewer people who even were alive at the time of, partition and all the rest of it. There is opportunity for new hope. I mean, we can't go on the way we are now. And I don't see any possible virtue or even possibility of a one-state solution. So I think two-state will come home to be the solution. And people will come forward who in the end want to do this. As I say, I think it was 54 members of the Knesset actually voted against the annexation. Well, I stand to be corrected, but that's my memory. It was a significant number of people. And they weren't just the Arab members.
Yeah. I didn't realize it was nearly that high, so that's quite promising. Yeah, well, thank you for that. It's always a tough one, isn't it? The one-state, two-state debate. Obviously, it's still the British party line is two-state, and so
can't see that changing.
Yeah. Georgie, I think you've got a few more questions as well, don't you?
Yeah, I have, and I wanted to pick up on what you mentioned about keeping the story alive. We just had the 100 years of the Balfour Declaration last year, and it's something really, as you say, there's very few people alive when the mandate was handed over. And how do we keep this message alive for our children and to keep this current? Because, as you say, it's in the news every single day, but it isn't in the news because it's a new story every day.
Well, education is a big thing, huge. I mean, I don't know what, it's very interesting because the curriculum in Europe is being examined now for what it says about slavery. What did it say about Palestine? What does the curriculum actually say about Israel-Palestine? I bet there's precious little examination and precious little open discussion. It should be an important element of geography, of history, of society. I think there are ways in which young people can learn. I mean, people are horrified to discover. When I went to school, I learned about Wilberforce, because what a splendid man he was. He ended slavery. But they didn't teach us anything about slavery. They didn't actually tell us how it all came about, And I think that's important with the region here that we're discussing. I wonder how much of the history of what happened, how far do people go back and talk about the 30s and 40s and leading up to the moment. And I'm afraid to say, I think it's a very neglected element of what I regard as a very important education. After all, we talk, there's still Christian foundations and the rest of you talking about Christ and the cross and all the other things that happened in the region, but they don't talk about anybody else.
Yeah, this is true.
The ordinary people who live there now.
I think there's a bit of a resurgence of looking at sort of Britain's imperial past, with the Black Lives Matter movement, and so forth. And as a Palestinian and an organization working in Palestine, it'd be really nice for Palestine and the history of Palestine to be included in that wider debate as well.
Maybe we could have the lovely a documentary series like David Olusoga's fabulous series about the slavery. John, yes, John.
Palestinian lives matter,
Yeah, you could help us with the documentary. I think there's a question from Guy.
Quite justifiably, Jewish lives matter is known to be, a truth that out of the Second World War, it was really important to protect and preserve. But what about the others in the region? Is there a complementary concern for the survival of the Palestinian people?
It sort of harks back to the very vague wording of the Balfour Declaration and what it means for both groups of people. So Guy Morton, again, our trustee, fabulous Guy Morton. Hi, Guy. On COVID, is it true that we have been less badly affected than we feared so far? I think he's talking as an honorary Palestinian. An important component in this has been the willingness of our staff to contribute by being flexible in taking leave and so on. As with other charities, there is a scope for delayed and continued pressure because of competition with donors from other causes more immediately affected by COVID. And COVID also compounds the mobility pressures that we've already talked about. So we've been very lucky in that our staff have been so understanding. As St. John staff members, they've taken leave where they've needed to so that we can keep going. But yeah, do you have any thoughts on what Guy has said there?
Well, I think he's said it pretty well himself.
Yeah.
I don't think I can improve on it.
So we have been lucky in that the last I heard, none of our staff members had been affected by COVID badly. So we just have to hope that remains true.
I'm not an epidemiologist, and I'm mystified about the whole global pattern of the issue. I mean, my wife is an epidemiologist, an African epidemiologist, and the story in Africa is also very interesting, where there are great disparities of the outbreak. And I thought naively initially that heat had something to do with it, that actually we protected the hotter you were. I mean, the hotter countries were going to do better. And in some cases that seems to be true. But I have no scientific proof of this matter.
I don't think anyone knows really, do they?
I'm out of my depth here. I'm only a hack, not a medic.
We've got a question in from Magan. I don't know if people be aware, but we had the director, Suhail Houri, of the Edward Said Music Conservatory, who was arrested a couple of days ago, released on the same day, but after a long time being questioned, paperwork and computers confiscated and so forth. And also his wife, who runs the only Palestinian cinema in Jerusalem. And so yeah, we have a question from Megan about this. Over the weekend, there was an attack on Palestinian cultural centers, also dismantling of a font from a church. Why hasn't anyone in the media picked up on this in the UK, especially the church? And I want to throw in my own little question there, because no one can stop me. I wanted to ask why the Israelis might think of our culture as such a threat, because there's been quite a lot of these attacks.
Well, let's first of all deal with the failure to cover the attacks and to report them. I'm afraid this is another instance where the social network could work to your advantage. And it's enormously important that people who have knowledge, evidence of something, do use the social network to, even if only briefly, write it up. Now, of course, how do you get people to read it? You know, if you don't have a large number of followers and the rest of it. But that's the sort of thing where I'd like a direct message. You know, you pick on somebody you want to. You can direct message people on Twitter, I know. I don't know about Facebook, but I think there are ways, and I think actually that's also something which it's worth actually contacting a news organization and saying, look, this is what I know, and this is what you ought to be looking at. Here are the instances. Here are a couple of names of people who might be able to tell you more. We're not lazy, but we do tend to do the easier jobs first.
Human nature, that's fine.
and you know, in some ways, in media terms, as well as others, of course, it is something of a ghetto. You know, I mean, there aren't enough foreign correspondents living in the region. Too many are being drawn away to other conflicts, newer conflicts, and there isn't the pickup that there should be. But everything you've said seems to me to be demanding of international coverage. And to be absolutely honest, I mean, if you're British, for example, you should get in touch with the Church Times. I mean, they would be horrified to hear that a font had been desecrated and that, you know, this, that, and the other. I mean, I don't think it would be difficult to get a pick up on this. It's just a question of being judicious. I know people don't necessarily want to be journalists, but there is a little journalist in all of us. And journalism, propaganda, pressure, it all chimes. And one way or another, you need to get this out and get people looking at it. And there's no harm in finding out the Twitter handle or the online address of somebody from Reuters or whatever. Somehow you can get it out. Don't sit idly by and then complain that nobody ever covered it.
That's a really interesting point. So tagging any of your contacts that have a wider audience and atting people on Twitter and Instagram or whatever platform you're on, who may have a wider voice than you.
I mean, not nothing is there a great row, you know, about abuse, etc. online, and sure enough, that's a very justified row. But actually, the big story is that stories, information has been getting out in a way that's never happened before. And it's largely thanks to Facebook and Twitter and accounts like that.
Well, bless him, Magan says he wrote to the Archbishop of Canterbury about it. So that's a great start, I'd say.
Copy us in.
Yeah. Got a message from Angus Rhodes, who, John, you'll love this. He's one of the Knights Templar who's they support our work. They actually sponsor our orthoptics department, which deals largely with children with congenital issues and squints and so forth. So they do fantastic work raising money right up and down the country for us. And Angus has taken on the 12 Herculean tasks. So he is he's walked on fire. Has he, Angus, I don't know, I can't remember if you've jumped out of the plane yet, but you get the drift. I think he did 3 marathons in 2 weeks, all for St. John. Don't know how he's managing it, but he's fantastic. So he's made a comment, more of a comment. He says he was taught precious little on this at school. I've been horrified by what I've learned over the past few years. Thank you to John for his interesting points so far. Also to Georgie and St. John as ever. Deanna, Vincent and the Balfour Project are helping to rapidly improve my education on the situation in Palestine also, and its history. The more I hear, the more I wish I could do more. Brings me nicely into my comment about in the chat. If you feel inclined to donate, we greatly appreciate that. So I've put the link in the chat box. Obviously, we rely on our donations. We get funding from trusts and foundations and a few other sources, but we would really struggle if we didn't have the support from individuals. We're trying to adapt our events program and our appeals programs, our campaigns programs with COVID. It's unprecedented times, we've all heard this, but it really is. So we have tried to move our events, the Guild events, Georgie, online, and they've been fascinating. And if you have found it interesting, we'd very much appreciate donation.
Well, I think Angus is a great lesson to us all. You know, that is selfless and wonderful, and you know, I feel uncomfortable for not having done 2 marathons.
Why have you not walked on fire for us yet?
I haven't walked on fire. I like to cycle if there are any cycle events.
Well, maybe, Angus, did you hear that? John wants to go cycling with you on your cycling task. Georgie, we've got another question.
I just wanted to pick up on the foreign correspondence. Actually, it was reminding me of something that John Simpson said in one of his presentations about when he'd started out, there'd be legions of foreign correspondents who gradually dwindled over the years. And I don't think that it necessarily we've made the connection that actually, of course, we can get to Facebook and Twitter, and we should, because a lot of the foreign correspondents will share their stories now, and they're reproduced by each other, maybe. And I found that really fascinating. I think that first came out in the Iraq War, didn't it? That there was a mass production of foreign correspondence, John.
Absolutely. I think we underestimate, you know, what we can do. And it's a question of, you know, playing ducks and drakes and trying to find who to latch onto to. I mean, writing a letter to the Archbishop of Canterbury is one thing. Getting onto his Twitter feed or whatever will be even better. I mean, he probably has one. I mean, practically everyone has something that you can latch into.
Yeah. I love that Jon Snow's telling us to get more on social media. So, well, but it is true, as you say, it means that you can find out stories much easier. People within Gaza, the West Bank, can share their stories and get an audience. And yes, what you mentioned before about foreign correspondence, we had Sarah Helm talking for the Balfour Project last week. I'm sure you know. Former Middle East correspondent for The Independent, and writes for The Guardian as well, doesn't she? And she said that it's really difficult as a foreign correspondent to get into Gaza. It's never guaranteed. You have to be sponsored by a newspaper, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very unique set of circumstances that just means it's very difficult for news to come out of there in the normal traditional ways, which is where social media is great, isn't it?
Well, I mean, in the end, what we need is the tip that something is happening, or there is a persistence of a certain kind of behavior, or whatever it is. And then we can, I mean, I obviously work for quite a big organization, ITN, and it's doing ITV, Channel 4 News and all the others. No, I only work for Channel 4 News. But what I'm saying is that if you can get the word somehow to us, we can go through the channels and get in and do something. But the trouble is, we don't live our lives looking for what's going on in the Middle East. We have to be told. And I know it's a bad thing, but the fact is, when you're a generalist and you're, you know, covering a lot of different things, you know, it's a great help to have people get on to you.
I've got a comment from Angus.
What should we be doing?
Angus says he has seen you cycle around London before, and I'm sure you would be much better than him at a cycling challenge. I've got a question about CPGs and how they can do more, which I will actually aim at Georgie. But while you think about that, I would just read out the comments from Vincent Fien. John is right about the absence of Israel-Palestine from the UK national curriculum, partly because the mandate was not the UK's finest hour, and partly because teachers are cautious about being caught up in accusations of anti-Semitism. Can we lobby for more curriculum coverage if this part of our history, which is still so highly relevant today?
Well, I think yes is the answer, and I think we should use the breakthrough that's been achieved over slavery to teach us as to how we can do it. And of course, to a large extent, we're very dependent on people who've been affected by it, because that's what's been so effective with slavery. So many families and the rest of it. Well, you know, there are many living families who've been desperately affected by what has happened in the last 50 years, 70 years. And you know, there's still plenty to build on, which it isn't as if this is dead history, it's living history.
So Georgie, Heather Baker, who's involved in the CPGs, met her once, I hope she remembers. Thank you for this very interesting talk. Can local CPGs, John, that's the county priory groups of St. John based all around the UK, can local CPGs do more to raise the profile of the humanitarian work involved in the OPT?
Yes, and I'm sure they can. And I think partly the forum, when we have the annual symposium, which didn't take place this year because of the COVID restrictions, that is a real opportunity for the county priory groups to meet St. John Hospital volunteers, the office, the trustees, and it's a great forum to get together, which perhaps actually Paul Herbage is with us, isn't he? So hello Paul, and who's newly in position. Yeah, and that's a shame that we couldn't go ahead with that. So maybe we need to try and do something online to get people together to talk, because this isn't going to end soon, and we're not going to be able to get together at the gate, which is, you know, obviously one of our venues where we can gather large groups of people within St. John. So yes, ideas to think about that. We've all, as Diana said earlier, thank you very much to anyone who's coming with us on these online forums. We're very much sort of face-to-face organisation, get together in groups at events and talks. So we're really grateful for people for joining in these online. And we just have to be realistic that this is a really easy way to communicate. As I said, we've got people from South Africa and Australia. And if we've got our own county priory groups in Britain that we ought to be communicating with, well, yes, I'm sure more could be done.
Yeah, and Paul's made a comment. Yes, we can do more. Having just started as Priory Hospitaller, I have started to contact CPG hospital reps and want to develop a strategy. So I encourage CPG members to reach out to Paul Herbage, and Paul Herbage reach out to us. Hope you and Rosemary are well.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got our last film with our CEO, Ahmed. That's got some really useful information in that. Will be up on the website quite soon as a new website coming for St. John. And those are really interesting talks. We've also got the film Eyes of St. John, which is a really good 15-minute film just encapsulating the key areas of our work. That was introduced by Vanessa Redgrave, and the film was directed by her son Carlo, and beautifully illustrates what we do.
Yeah.
So I direct you to the St. John website as well.
And also St. John YouTube channel. We had a talk recently with Ahmed Mali, Dr. Ahmed Mali, our CEO, and he gave us a bit of a COVID update and general update. And we recorded that and we put it up on the YouTube channel. So if you want to hear him talk about that, then I do recommend that you have a listen to that. I've got another question. Georgie, have you got one? Or
I've got one about COVID, and John, I hope that this is about, the question is, how do you think the pandemic will affect Palestinian-Israeli relations?
One would long to think that, you know, that a parity of suffering, you know, from a horrible pandemic would bring a parity of understanding and, you know, desire to break down barriers in order to defeat it. But I mean, I'm afraid I think that's asking for the moon as things stand. I don't really think that it will. I am an optimist, but I don't think it will particularly bring people together. I don't know. I don't know. Would that it would. One of the things I have been feeling while being part of this is really I've enjoyed it and learned a lot, but I would love to see the people who are asking the questions. Can we extend the Zoom next time? Because I have a Zoom every day at work, and I see everybody on it, and we have about 100 people on it.
Yes, we've actually used the webinar function because otherwise we have to pay separately. So we've been very kindly been granted it by the Balfour project so that we can have quite a lot of people. Yeah.
It costs money. Forget what I said.
No, that's fine.
Well, one of us might donate it or something.
Sorry?
One of us might donate.
Yes, well. And maybe we do another talk, John, with you in a meeting mode. So
yeah, with everybody on screen. But you're right, John. I mean, yeah, we're acutely aware of how much money we don't want to spend, unnecessarily, and not on medical equipment and procedures. So again, I'll just reiterate what Deanna said. Thank you very much to Vincent and Balfour Project, because they're allowing us to piggyback on all of their technology to put these on. And it is quite a sizable amount of money, so we're very grateful.
Great. Well,
I've got a question, on another question on the political background. Political comment tends, for understandable reasons, recently to focus on developments in Israel and the US. For the hospital, developments in Arab states are also of great interest, both because some of them support us financially, for example, Qatar, and because of their potential influence on annexation and the two-state solution. How does Jon see the prospect of their speaking with a clearer and more united voice on Palestine?
That's a difficult question, isn't it? I mean, there are many things they could speak about with a clearer and more united position. I suppose, because I'm now not really sure of how the pandemic has affected the Arab world in particular. I mean, I know there have been very bad times in Egypt and in some Gulf states, but, and that you would have thought would be a motivation for bringing us all together on the issue. As I keep saying, I'm an optimist, and I hope it does, but I'm not convinced it will.
Georgie, have you got any other questions?
I think I've run through all the questions we had in before. I think Paul, I'd quite like to answer Paul Herbage. So he's saying, yes, the counter-priory groups can do more. Having just started as Priory Hospitaller, I've started a contact group to get people together. So really good luck with that, Paul. And if the Eye Hospital can support you in any way and give any presentations or information, we'd love to work with you on that.
That'd be great.
And we'd love for Jon to come visit our services in Palestine when it's possible.
Well, I will. I definitely will.
I'd love to take you on mobile outreach.
I'm just waiting for the pandemic to recede.
Yes. To have you come join us for the day on mobile outreach. It's absolutely fascinating. I've been with them a few times, and it goes out every single day in the West Bank and now in Gaza as well. Although I think some services have been temporarily stalled because of the situation. They load up a van with all the staff and the equipment and the medicine that they need. They go to really remote areas, remote not because of distance, but because of the political situation. And they will see up to 200 people in a day, normally treating them on the spot, helping them with any permit applications if they need to go and seek further care at one of our other clinics. And these are people that sometimes have never had healthcare before. The thing with eyes is that quite often other medical conditions obviously have an impact on your sight and your eyes. So quite often we help them diagnose other conditions such as diabetes, for example. So it's one of my personal favorite branches of our work, definitely, and really just fascinating to go and see. So we'd love to have you come join us one day. So you just let us know when you're in the region, and we'll arrange that. Georgie and John, I'll hand over to you for any kind of final comments or roundup. While I'll put the picture back up because we love it.
Yes, put the photo back up. Yes, we would love to welcome you, John, back. It would be great if you could come on Outreach. Actually, as you said, it's a great opportunity to make a film, and it's something that the Guild funds. We've got one van on the road at the moment. It's a key thing. Whoever thought that up, that was a fantastic thing to do in the 1980s. We want to thank you very much for coming today and supporting us. There'll be a recording available, so we'll send that out to everybody who's registered, and do share on if you think anybody that you know would be interested in supporting our work or hearing about what we're doing. And John, thank you very, very much. I'd like you to.
Well, it's been a privilege to be with everyone. An amazing turnout of questioners and loyalists and workers and the rest. It's been a lovely experience, and I'm feeling a bit homesick for the region. So I promise you I'll be getting there once it's possible to move about freely. Heaven knows when that will be, but it's definitely a high priority.
We look forward to welcoming you.
Thank you very much for risking having me.
Well, it's been lovely to welcome you today, and please stay safe, everybody, and we look forward to working with you again soon. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you all. Thank you for joining us. Hi, John. Thank you.
Thank you.